Hey guys, I know this is a horror podcast and all, but I want to make sure that I put out this trigger warning for this episode. In a lot of the horror world, we deal with a lot of death and a lot of unfortunate accidents, but this one's going to be a doozy. And in this episode is going to be discussing a lot of death, murder, suicide, possible mental illness, violence. If this isn't something that you guys are feeling up to listening to today, I 100% understand and am looking forward to seeing you guys in the next one. But this episode is going to be an interesting one. Let's get into it. He had always been a skeptic, a man of science who prided himself on debunking myths. But what he encountered on that fateful night would shake the very core of his disbelief. It all began with a series of inexplicable deaths at the Cecil Hotel. Strange suicides, even more bizarre and horrifying than the last. Rumors of a malevolent force, an entity preying on the hotel's residents, quickly spread through the city's underbelly. John had received an anonymous tip about an unregistered guest. A guest who seemed to know far too much about the hotel's far too dark history. Following a trail of hushed whispers and uneasy glances, he found himself in a dimly lit lobby, staring up at the faded grand foyer of the Cecil Hotel. The lobby was a relic of a bygone era, its once luxurious decor now coated in grime. John approached the front desk, where an elderly clerk eyed him with suspicion. After some probing, the clerk reluctantly handed over the key card with a muttered warning. Room 1323. Don't say I didn't warn you. John's journey up to the 13th floor was punctuated by the unsettling creak of the elevator and the flickering lights that cast long, jittery shadows along the corridors. He found room 1323, tucked away at the end of the corridor that seemed to stretch into the abyss. The door creaked open, revealing a room that seemed untouched by time. An oppressive, stale air, thick with neglect. Inside, John found what he had come for. The guest in question was nowhere to be seen, but the room was filled with old journals, their pages filled with frantic scribblings about a dark presence that had been haunting the hotel for decades. The entries described a demon, an entity that fed on despair and manipulated its victims into ending their own lives. As John read through the journals, he noticed a disturbing pattern. The demon appeared to be connected to a series of symbols scrawled across the room. Each one seemed to be more intricate and menacing than the last. It became clear that the demon had found a way to exert its influence through these symbols in the hotel. Determined to stop the entity, John searched for a way to banish the demon. His research led him to a makeshift ritual, a complex series of counterspells and protective charms designed to sever the demon's connection to the material world, and possibly even free the hotel. Armed with this knowledge, he prepared to confront the entity. As the clock ticked past midnight, John began the ritual in the center of the room, meticulously placing the protective charms and reciting his incantations. The temperature dropped, and an oppressive silence fell over the room. Then, shadows began to move, slithering, twisting, in ways that seemed to defy logic. No thing could move like that. The air grew thick with an unnatural fog. Impossible given the fact that all the windows were closed. And the demon's presence became palpable. John's heart raced, but he pressed on, his voice trembling but determined. Suddenly, the room seemed to distort, the walls bending inward as if the space itself was under siege. He felt an icy breath on his neck, and a low, guttural growl filled the air. Just as he was about to complete the final incantation, the room erupted into chaos. The symbols on the walls began to glow with their malevolent light, and John felt an overwhelming force trying to push him into despair. He struggled to maintain his focus, but the pressure was unbearable. The demon's powers surged, distorting reality all around him. In a desperate move, John completed the ritual. Shattering the final protective charm, the oppressive force seemed to convulse in rage, and in a deafening roar, the presence ripped from the room, leaving John alone in the silence that followed. Exhausted and shaken, John stumbled out of the room, only to find that the night had not ended. The Cecil Hotel, once a silent witness to countless tragedies, now seemed eerily quiet. The streets outside were empty. The city held its breath. The following morning, John discovered that room 1323 had been sealed off, its doors bearing a new warning. One he knew would never truly keep the darkness at bay. The deaths had stopped, but the feeling of dread lingered, as if the demon's malevolent essence had seeped into the very fabric of the hotel. Or maybe in this case it was the fabric of the city. John left the Cecil Hotel with the grim knowledge that some forces are just too insidious to be fully eradicated. The hotel's dark history had claimed another victim, not of physical death, but of a soul forever marked by its chilling encounter. And so, the Cecil Hotel remained a shadowy testament to all the horrors that lingered beyond our understanding, where the line of the living and the dead cross. Maybe one day, the city will recover. Maybe. Welcome to Scary Stories with Cy. Welcome back to Scary Stories with Cy. The cold open for this week was a fictional story inspired by this week's topic of the Cecil Hotel. Of course, like I always, everything that happened in the cold open has no fictional standing, or no non-fictional standings, and everything going forward will be the true story behind what has happened at the Cecil Hotel. So, welcome back. Like I said, today we're going to be going over the Cecil Hotel, where the walls are said to breathe and the shadows never sleep. But beware, you're here today. May stay along with you after the lights go out. Okay, so picture it. The year was 1924, and Los Angeles was a city on the rise. Its streets filled with dreams and ambition. In the heart of downtown, the Cecil Hotel was born. Now, this place was huge, with 700 rooms, marble lobby floors, luxurious decor. This place was really fancy. But some believe that from its very inception, something dark festered within its walls. Now, in its early years, the Cecil Hotel was a symbol of high society, catering only to the city's elite. Then the Great Depression struck. The hotel began to change, its grand foyer replaced by the despair of a society it declined. What was once a palace of dreams became a refuge for the lost. Those whose dreams had effectively turned into nightmares. So, this is where a lot of the dark stuff starts to come into play. Every story has its launching point, and with this one, it was suicide in the year 1927, just a couple years after the hotel had actually opened. They had their very first suicide, a man by the name of Percy Osmond Cook. Cecil Hotel's history is stained with blood, and its walls have witnessed horrors that defy explanation. Let's walk through a timeline that goes over everything that happened. Now, there's a lot of different people that have lost their lives at the Cecil Hotel, so I'm just going to kind of try to run through it really quickly. As I'd already mentioned, Percy Ormond Cook was the very first one to commit suicide in the year 1927 by means of gunshot wound to the head. This had taken place only 3 years after the hotel had originally opened. Following ahead to 1931, a W.K. Norton checks under a false name to be found dead in his room the next morning, poisoned by his own hands. 1944, Dorothy Jean Purcell, a young woman staying at the hotel. Her trip suddenly took a very surprising turn when a normal, perfectly healthy, believing woman shows up to the hotel to surprisingly give birth. In a moment of pure shock, she throws her baby out the window. The baby's lifeless body was found on the roof of a nearby building. I guess at the very least, on the plus side of that, the baby was not found on the ground, so people finding the body was at least minimalized. And then probably one of the most famous cases, and one of a lot of horror files' favorite cases, period, Elizabeth Short, better known as the Black Dahlia. She was seen reportedly going to and from the Cecil Hotel right before her murder. Now, she herself was not killed at the Cecil Hotel, but like I had mentioned, there's a very dark and mysterious kind of history with this. Not all of them had been outright murders. Some of them just seemed to have death present, and with the Black Dahlia, that was one of those situations. Then going ahead to 1954, a Helen Gurney, at the age of 55, leaps from her window on the 7th floor. Her body landed on the Cecil's marquee, and she kind of spawned a series of jumpings from the hotel. In 1962, a Pauline Aughton, at 27, jumps from the 9th floor after a fight with her estranged husband. She lands on another person who was just walking by. Both of them died immediately on the Cecil's Hotel's property. And then in 1964, by the nickname of Pigeon Goldie Osgood, a well-known local is found raped, stabbed, and strangled in her room. Her murder remains unsolved. And yeah, going ahead to 1985, Richard Ramirez, who we'll be talking about in a little more detail later on in the episode, the infamous Night Stalker, takes up residence in the Cecil Hotel. In 1991, another character that we're going to be discussing later on in this episode, the Australian serial killer Jack Unterweger checks in, seeking inspiration for his writing. Most recently, though, was in 2013. Probably a lot of you guys have already heard of this case and either know of its connection to the Cecil Hotel or maybe are unaware of it. But the disturbing case of Elisa Liam, a young woman whose bizarre behavior was caught on the hotel's security camera, and then her body was discovered in a water tank on the roof. This one is definitely the most famous incident of the Cecil Hotel, given that hotel footage. It went viral for a long time. People were seen all over the place trying to figure out what had happened to her, almost to a, how do I put this? We're going to go with an appropriate level of investigation. Now, there's a multi-part documentary on Netflix about the Cecil Hotel that goes into great detail about the disturbing case of Elisa Lam. But trying to sum it up a little bit quickly, she was a Canadian student who was traveling abroad for just pleasure. She was coming to America for the first time and decided to go to Los Angeles. She was a secluded individual who didn't like talking to others very often. She was pinged as a student almost immediately by the hotel employees who said that they pinged her as a student because of the fact that they always saw her with books in her hands. Now, she had a entire vacation plan with an almost full-fledged itinerary. She had days that she was going to be in specific sections of California and what she was planning on doing in those places. And she also had an agreement with her parents that she was going to check in daily with them to make so that way they were aware that she was okay and safe. When she stopped replying, they didn't even give her a whole day. They immediately, and good on them by the way, reported her missing because of everything that happened next. They were wise to come to that hunch. But so the way that a lot of it ends up going is, or at the very least her last few moments that anybody saw her, so she was outside and she met with two, at the moment, random, tall, large men. And this seemed strange at the time because of the fact that she had been so secluded and so recluse about everybody that this being one of the few interactions that people saw her in drew up some red flags. Turns out, though, she was actually at a bookstore earlier on that day, that she was worried she wouldn't be able to carry everything because she really liked reading, so she had gotten a lot of heavy books and then had them delivered to the hotel later on. That is essentially what was happening. But in her final moments, which was captured on the hotel elevator's camera, shows her acting really bizarre. She's acting as if she was hiding from something, and I mean, the video is easily found on YouTube, and I can even include one in the show notes, link in the show notes. But she's found going back and forth, in and out of the elevator. She's making odd hand gestures, and then she gets back in, and that's where everything ends. She had her checkout the next day, and now this part is traditional policy. When a guest doesn't check out and leave stuff behind, the hotel has to put everything in storage in case the people come back for it. And she didn't check out, so they bagged everything and put everything away and cleaned the hotel room, possibly getting rid of any evidence that may have been there. And then everybody started reporting bizarre problems with the hotel. People would be having problems with water pressure, water was coming out weird. It was a lot of problems with the water at the Hotel Cecil. They sent their maintenance guy to go search around the area, and he went up to the top of the building, found out pretty quickly. They found a naked Elisa Lam in the water tank. Her body was bloated, and it was found weeks later. It's not really too sure how she got up there. She shouldn't have been able to get in there. There was locked doors that needed to be propped open for her to get through. This isn't a place that would be easily accessible for somebody like her. And unfortunately, that's where all of the concrete information ends. After that, it kind of turns into speculation. Some people believe that the hotel was involved due to a portion of the security cameras footage being erased. Some people think that it was the hotel's maintenance guy who had done away with her and left everything open, being one of the main people would have had access to that area. There's just so many different possibilities. Turns out that she had left behind her medication, and upon doing some math, was found out that she wasn't taking all of her medications as prescribed, which, depending on her medical history, which is a much deeper issue that we're not going to go into here, could have led to some erratic behavior like we would have seen in the hotel where she was acting bizarrely. Some people who do go off of certain types of medication have issues like that. But that's unfortunately where her section of the Hotel Cecil story does come to an end. In a separate section of the Hotel Cecil's time periods, in the mid-1980s, the city of Los Angeles was engulfed by terror, and the Cecil Hotel became a dark sanctuary for one of America's most notorious serial killers, Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker. During this time, his name became synonymous with fear, and his stay at the Cecil Hotel added a chilling layer to the hotel's already sinister reputation. Born in 1960 in El Paso, Texas, Ramirez's life was marked by violence from a young age. His father's brutal behavior and history of abuse laid the groundwork for a disturbed psyche. By the time he reached Los Angeles, his predatory instincts were honed, and he embarked on a killing spree that would shock the nation. Ramirez's modus operandi, which, on a side note, is something that I just learned from researching this article, and is apparently a way of referring to something. So like in this situation, it was his way of going about things. He was methodical. He would enter homes through open windows, terrorize his victims before committing horrific acts of violence. His crimes included burglary, assault, and the brutal slaying of 13 people between the years of 1984 and 1985. During his reign of terror, Ramirez used the Cecil Hotel as a base of operations. The hotel's dark, neglected atmosphere mirrored his own deranged mind. Guests and staff reported seeing him returning to the hotel covered in blood, his clothes stained with the evidence of his horrific acts. Witnesses recalled how Ramirez would casually mingle with other guests, appearing as just another troubled soul in a place already frequented by the downtrodden and desperate. He even left behind a trail of terror in the hotel, with rumors of his presence spreading among the guests. Ramirez's criminal activities eventually led to his arrest in August of 1985. After, his face was splashed across newspapers and his appearance was recognized by vigilant citizens. The Cecil Hotel would forever be linked to his crimes. Yeah, that's actually a fun fact, by the way, about him. So, the way that Ramirez was caught was he was just walking down the street, happened to catch a newspaper of his own face, saw it, and he got panicked. And because he got panicked, everybody around him took attention to him, realized who he was, and the entire city banded together and just attacked him. They pinned him down, made it to where he couldn't get away, called the police, and Ramirez was arrested, and everything finally came to an end. Their year of terror was over. Ramirez's trial and subsequent conviction only solidified the hotel's reputation as a place where darkness and evil converge, though. Unfortunately, the hotel had already developed a long history at this point of suicides and deaths and other murders, drug usage. It was literally in the darkest areas of Los Angeles. So when this serial killer was proven to have been operating out of there, it didn't really do everybody any favors for that area. But fast forward to 1991, and the Hotel Cecil played host to another monster. Jack Unterweger was an Australian serial killer whose dark fascination with his own criminal legacy led him to Los Angeles. Unterweger's stay at the Cecil Hotel was marked by a chilling blend of arrogance and brutality. Jack was no ordinary killer. Born in 1950, his early years were spent in a cycle of crime and imprisonment. After being released from prison, Unterweger reinvented himself as a journalist and writer. His dark past, however, followed him, and his quest for notoriety led him to the United States. During his time in Los Angeles, Unterweger used the Cecil Hotel as his home base. Under the guise of a journalist, he continued his killing spree, specifically targeting sex workers. He would lure his victims into his car with promises of money for work before strangling them with their own bras. This was always his signature method of murder. The horror of Unterweger's crime was compounded by the fact that he used his position to blend into society, all the while hiding his true nature. His stay at the Cecil Hotel was a dark chapter in the history and period marked by a serial killer who operated with a chilling sense of impunity. Unterweger's time at the Cecil added an additional layer of dread to its already sinister reputation. His crimes committed under the shadow of his false identity cast a long and dark shadow over the hotel. The legacy of his actions, like Ramirez, is a stark reminder of the evil that can dwell within the seemingly ordinary. So you can't have this much death, gloom, doom, and despair without the occasional ghost. Guests have reported seeing shadowy figures in their rooms, hearing disembodied voices, feeling cold spots in the hallways. Elevators, especially, seem to be the hotspot for the paranormal activity, with many claiming to have encountered something or someone that isn't quite human. Now, it does raise into question how much of this is society having its own grasp on the hotel. When you expect a certain level of fear, you can almost create it yourself. Now, that's not to say that these cases are not valid. Like, they still experienced everything. They still went through and saw what they had. But some has to wonder, yeah. The hotel's infamy has also attracted ghost hunters and paranormal investigators who have claimed to have captured evidence of spirits, voices, apparitions, and even some physical manifestations. The Cecil Hotel? Is it haunted? Well, nowadays it's actually going underneath a completely different name. In an attempt to rebrand and kind of get a new image, the Hotel Cecil did rebrand as the Stay on Main. Ultimately, if you look into the history of hotels, especially hotels that have been around for almost 100 years, like the Cecil Hotel, it's going to have a dark past of macabre and terrible things. Hotels are traveling points for people going from one place to the next. I mean, that part seems obvious, but that also within itself draws people in. The people looking to cause the bad. to make the ones that wouldn't be noticed anyways disappear. Now, the Cecil Hotel does still stand, as I mentioned, as the Stay on Main, but it does still have the whole monument of all that is dark and tragic. It is a place where history and horror intertwine, where the floors hold a story of despair, and rooms echo with the cries of those long gone. As you turn off this show and return back to the safety of your own home, remember this. The darkness that resides in places like the Cecil Hotel is not confined by its walls. It lingers, waiting for those brave to seek it out. But be warned, once you've stepped into the shadows, it's not so easy to leave them behind. But that being said, thanks for joining me on this spine-chilling tale through history. Now keep your lights on, and remember, the scariest stories are often the ones that are true. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.